The wind whispers through the skeletal remains of a forgotten palace, a place where history has turned to dust and silence reigns supreme. Here, among the crumbling colonnades and ivy-choked courtyards, the stones themselves seem to cry out with the memory of a tragedy that time could not erase. This was the citadel of Illyrian, a kingdom built on a foundation of hope, only to be swallowed by the very shadows it sought to hold at bay. The air is thick with the scent of rain and decay, and in the deep twilight one can almost hear the ghostly echo of a child's laughter, a queen's desperate prayer, and a king's final, agonizing roar. This is not a story of glory or valor, but a tale etched in the sorrow of what was lost. It is the story of a crown that promised greatness, a throne that demanded blood, and a princess, the kingdom's solitary light, who walked into the encroaching darkness and was never seen again. Her name has been lost to the official chronicles, a footnote in a blood-stained ledger, but her absence haunts these ruins, a permanent testament to the cost of a king's ambition. Before the gilded gates and marble halls there was only Valerius. He was not born to rule, but a man forged in the crucible of envy and shadow, a second son with a firstborn's hunger. His path to the throne was not paved with honor, but carved with a blade in the dead of night. He moved through the courts of his father's kingdom like a phantom, his smiles masking a mind that saw power not as a birthright, but as a prize to be seized. The whispers began then, quiet as rustling leaves, tales of a convenient hunting accident that claimed his elder brother, the true heir. There was no proof, only a chilling swiftness in how Valerius assumed the mantle, his mourning clothes barely worn before they were replaced with the ermine of a monarch. He was crowned under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, his grip on the scepter so tight his knuckles were white. The kingdom of Illyrian watched him ascend, a man whose ambition was a ravenous fire, and they felt a collective shiver, a premonition of the cold and brutal reign that was to come. He was a king who had stolen his crown from a ghost, and he would spend his life looking over his shoulder, forever haunted by the blood that had anointed him. To legitimize his stained crown, King Valerius sought a queen whose virtue was as renowned as his was questioned. He found her in Seraphina, a princess from a distant, sun-drenched land, famed for her wisdom and a beauty that was said to calm the most savage of hearts. Her arrival in Illyrian was like the first day of spring after a brutal winter. She moved with a grace that seemed foreign to the cold, stone corridors of the citadel, her laughter a melody in halls that had only known the echoes of plotting and fear. Seraphina was a political pawn, a beautiful seal on a bloody decree, but she carried her fate with a quiet dignity. She saw the darkness in her husband's eyes, the deep, unsettling paranoia that clung to him like a shroud, but she believed she could be the light to temper it. The people adored her. She was their symbol of hope, a promise that the kingdom could be more than the dark deeds of its new king. She brought with her art, music, and a sense of compassion the court had never known. But she was a dove brought to a serpent's nest, and every gentle touch, every wise counsel, was a silent battle against the encroaching darkness that lived within the palace walls, and most terrifyingly, within the king himself. In the second year of their fractured reign, a new light flickered to life within the grim walls of the citadel. Princess Lyra was born, a child of impossible innocence in a place that festered with secrets. Her cries were not of sorrow but of pure, unblemished life, a sound so foreign to the palace that it seemed to momentarily silence the endless whispers. For King Valerius, she was the ultimate validation, the living proof of his dynasty, a future heir whose claim would be undisputed. He looked upon her and saw not a daughter but the solidification of his legacy, a beautiful, fragile key to lock away his past sins. For Queen Seraphina, Lyra was everything more. She was hope made manifest, a reason to endure the chilling emptiness of her marriage and the palpable fear that permeated the court. The princess became her entire world, a sanctuary of love in a kingdom of shadows. She would spend hours in the royal gardens with her daughter, teaching her the names of flowers, her laughter a shield against the darkness. The kingdom celebrated her birth, seeing in her innocent eyes the promise of a brighter dawn, unaware that her fate was already being woven into a tapestry of betrayal and death. As Princess Lyra grew, so too did the shadows that writhed in the corners of her father's kingdom. The initial whispers about the king's ascent had never truly faded. They had merely burrowed deeper, festering in the hearts of ambitious RDS and forgotten loyalists. A courtier named Lord Malachar, a man with a serpent's tongue and eyes that missed nothing, began to cultivate these seeds of dissent. He saw the king's paranoia as a weakness to be exploited, a crack in the foundation of the throne. Conspiracies were hatched not in war rooms, but in darkened alcoves and behind heavy tapestries, words of treason exchanged over goblets of poisoned wine. The queen felt the change in the air, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the changing seasons. She saw how the guards watched her, how conversations would cease the moment she entered a room. The palace, once a symbol of power, was transforming into a gilded cage, its beauty a veneer over a rotten core of envy and deceit. The very walls seemed to have ears, and every shadow seemed to hold a silent observer. King Valerius, sensing the shift, tightened his grip, but the more he squeezed, the more the loyalty he craved slipped through his fingers like fine sand. The king's ambition, once the fire that forged his crown, now became the inferno that threatened to consume his kingdom. Haunted by the ghost of his murdered brother and tormented by the whispers of rebellion, Valerius descended into tyranny. His hunger was no longer for legitimacy, but for absolute control, an obsession born of deep-seated fear. He saw betrayal in every face, a potential dagger in every friendly hand. Public squares that once held festivals now hosted executions, the gallows a permanent fixture against the sky. Spies were his eyes and ears, their shadowy network infesting every tavern, every market, and every noble house. He bled the kingdom's coffers dry to fund a vast army that served not to protect the borders, but to police his own people, a constant, intimidating presence. The king who had once sought to build a legacy was now only interested in survival, ruling not with respect but with a chilling, unyielding terror. He would sit upon his cold throne for hours, lost in silent contemplation, his gaze fixed on some unseen horror. His daughter, the Princess Lyra, was kept far from his darkening moods, a pristine doll in a house on the verge of collapse, while her father, the king, became a monster in his own right. Queen Seraphina's world had shrunk to the size of her own heart, a chamber filled with unspeakable fears and silent tears. The man she had married was gone, replaced by a paranoid tyrant who looked at her with suspicion, seeing her compassion as a weakness and her popularity as a threat. One moonless night, searching the king's private study for a book, she found it, a hidden compartment containing a single, damning letter. It was a confession not from the king, but from the man who had helped him stage his brother's hunting accident. The words burned into her soul, confirming the monstrous truth she had long suspected. Her husband was a fratricide, her throne built upon a bed of lies and bones. This knowledge became her secret torment, a poison she had to swallow every day. She could not speak of it, for to do so would be to sign her own death warrant, and more importantly, that of her daughter. Her once vibrant spirit began to wither. She moved through the court like a specter, her smiles brittle, her eyes holding a deep, profound sadness. She would clutch Princess Lyra close, her love for her daughter now mingled with a desperate, terrifying urgency to protect her from the sins of her father. Princess Lyra lived in a carefully constructed world of sunlight and innocence, a stark contrast to the kingdom crumbling just beyond her garden walls. To her, the palace was a wondrous playground of marble floors and endless corridors. Her father, the king, was a towering figure who occasionally presented her with jeweled toys, his dark moods a mystery she was too young to comprehend. Her mother, the queen, was her sun and moon, a source of endless love and gentle stories. She was unaware that she was the most valuable piece in a deadly game of power. Her name was invoked by the king as a symbol of his divine right to rule, and whispered by the conspirators as the key to a new regime, a puppet princess they could control once her father was gone. She was a porcelain doll on a chessboard of knives, her every move watched, her future debated by men who saw her not as a child, but as an asset. As she danced among the roses in her mother's garden, oblivious to the vipers circling her, her fragile destiny was being decided by forces of greed and vengeance. She was the kingdom's only light, and the darkness was preparing to extinguish her. The secret of the king's betrayal could not remain buried forever. Like a body in a shallow grave, the truth was destined to be unearthed. Lord Malachar, having gathered his allies and stoked the fires of rebellion to a fever pitch, chose the night of the annual harvest feast to unleash his venom. As the nobility of Illyrian gathered in the grand hall, feigning loyalty to a king they despised, Malachar rose. With a voice that cut through the feasting and music, he did not just accuse the king, he presented the proof. He held aloft the sworn testimony of the captain of the guard who had witnessed the true events of that fateful hunt years ago. He spoke of the king's elder brother, Prince Thuron, not falling from his horse but being struck down by Valerius's own hand. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The feast turned to chaos. Wine spilled like blood across the tables as allegiances shattered in an instant. The king roared in denial, but the truth was etched on his face, a mask of pure terror cracking to reveal the guilt beneath. The forbidden secret was now a war cry, a spark that ignited the kingdom into a raging inferno of civil war. The kingdom fractured overnight. The revelation of the king's sin was the signal the rebels had been waiting for. Armies loyal to the memory of the slain prince marched on the capital, their banners bearing the sigil of the rightful heir. The city became a slaughterhouse. The king's forces, built on fear rather than loyalty, began to crumble. Brother turned against brother in the streets, and the cobblestones ran slick with blood. The bells of the grand cathedral, which had once rung for royal weddings and births, now tolled a frantic, incessant death knell. From the highest tower of the citadel, the royal family could see the fires consuming their city, the screams of the dying carried on the smoke-filled wind. The palace, their impenetrable fortress, became their prison. The siege was brutal and swift. The outer walls were breached, and the roar of the mob flooded the courtyards. The very people who had once cheered for their queen and princess now bayed for their blood, their hunger for vengeance eclipsing all reason. The throne of Illyrian, built on a single, murderous betrayal, was about to be washed away in a torrent of righteous fury. As the sounds of slaughter echoed through the palace, Queen Seraphina knew her time was over. Her only thought was of Lyra. She refused to cower in a locked chamber, choosing instead to make her stand in the one place that had ever brought her peace, the royal gardens. She grabbed her terrified daughter's hand and fled through a hidden passage, emerging into the cold night air amidst her beloved moonpetal blossoms. But there was no escape. Lord Malachar and his men, their swords already stained, cornered them by the ancient fountain. Seraphina pushed Lyra behind her, shielding her daughter with her own body. She pleaded not for her own life but for her child S. Malachar looked at her, his face devoid of pity. To him she was merely the serpent's wife, and her child the serpent's spawn. He gave a cold, simple nod. Seraphina barely had time to whisper, "I love you," before the soldiers surged forward. Her last scream was swallowed by the chaos, a final, heartbreaking cry of a mother's love. She fell amongst the white flowers she had so carefully tended, her crimson blood a stark and terrible stain upon their pristine petals. King Valerius was not found in the throne room, nor on the battlefield defending his stolen crown. He was discovered in the royal treasury, frantically trying to gather gold and jewels, a pathetic coward to the very end. They dragged him from his riches, stripping him of his fine clothes and royal insignia, leaving him in nothing but rags. The man who had commanded armies and inspired terror was now just a trembling, broken figure. They paraded him through the blood-soaked streets of his own capital, the people who had once feared him now spitting and throwing filth upon him. His execution was not a grand affair, but a crude and humiliating spectacle in the muddy square where he had condemned so many others. They forced him to his knees and read aloud his crimes, his fratricide the first and most damning. As the executioner's axe was raised, Valerius looked out at the sea of hateful faces and saw nothing. No mercy, no legacy, no love. He had sacrificed his soul for a crown, and in the end it had brought him only this: a lonely, ignominious death. His last breath was a choked sob, a final admission of a life wasted on an ambition that had cost him everything. In the bloody chaos of the queen's murder, Princess Lyra vanished. No one saw who took her. Some say a soldier, seeing a flash of her white dress, took pity and spirited her away into the night. Others whisper a darker tale, that Lord Malachor, wanting no loose ends or future claimants to the throne, had her quietly disposed of, her small body cast into an unmarked grave. There were fleeting, ghost-like sightings in the years that followed: a serving girl in a border town with her same startling blue eyes, a young novice in a remote convent who never spoke of her past. But these were just whispers, desperate hopes in a land ravaged by war. She was a ghost, a story told to frighten children. No definitive trace of her was ever found. She simply disappeared from the pages of history, her life a question mark at the end of a tragic sentence. The king's daughter, the fragile hope of a broken kingdom, walked into the smoke and fire of that terrible night and never returned, her fate forever sealed in the silence of the unknown. Her disappearance was perhaps the cruelest wound of all, an unresolved sorrow that would forever haunt the ruins of her home. The fall of the house of Valerius did not bring peace. The kingdom of Illyrian, without a clear heir, shattered like glass. Lord Malachor, the architect of the rebellion, found himself unable to control the storm he had unleashed. Ambitious lords carved out their own petty fiefdoms, and the land was plunged into decades of brutal, unrelenting warfare. The grand citadel, the heart of the kingdom, was ransacked and abandoned, left to crumble under the indifferent gaze of the sun and moon. The gardens where the queen had died became overgrown with thorns and weeds, the white moon petals choked out by bitter herbs. The story of the royal family became a cautionary tale, a myth whispered by grandparents to warn against the poison of ambition. The murdered prince was sainted, the tyrant king became a devil in folklore, and the lost princess, Lyra, transformed into a sad, spectral figure, the ghost of the weeping girl who forever wanders the ruined palace, searching for her mother. The throne they had all fought and died for now sat empty in a decaying hall, covered in dust and cobwebs, a monument to the futility of their bloody struggle. How easily a kingdom can become a tomb. The story of Illyrian is not unique. It is a timeless echo of the human condition, a testament to how the lust for power inevitably leads to ruin. A king's ambition, a queen's sorrow, and a princess's stolen future — these are the currencies with which dark history is paid. The names may change, the empires may rise and fall, but the pattern remains. A crown built on a lie will always be heavy, a throne secured by blood will always be stained, and the innocent will always pay the highest price. The ruins of the citadel of Illyrian stand as a stark reminder that legacy is not forged in gold or stone, but in the memories we leave behind. King Valerius left only a legacy of fear and destruction. His daughter, the princess who never returned, left only a question, an eternal, sorrowful void that speaks louder than any chronicle of kings. Her silence is the final, haunting lesson, that in the brutal arithmetic of power, some losses can never be tallied, and some wounds can never, ever heal. History bleeds, and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.